The dog refused to enter the shelter and slept in the snow. Curious, the owner decided to investigate what was wrong. When he opened the doghouse, he was horrified by what he found. Pine Grove Estate stood majestically on the outskirts of Millbrook, its rose-colored stone walls gleaming in the setting sun. Emily Parker, a 28-year-old veterinarian, watched from the window of her makeshift clinic as Kaiser, an imposing German shepherd, performed his usual patrol routine through the property's gardens. "It's extraordinary how that dog has changed since he arrived," Emily thought, remembering the day her father, Robert Parker, had brought the frightened and distrustful puppy to the estate. 3 years later, Kaiser had become the most loyal guardian the family could wish for. The estate was not just a home, it was also a sanctuary for rescued animals that Emily cared for with dedication. Her father, a respected businessman in the region, had given up part of the property for her to fulfill her dream of helping animals in need. However, the last few months had been especially difficult due to the threat of losing the estate. "Emily!" Her mother Sarah's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your father wants to talk to you in the study. He says it's important." With a sigh, Emily headed towards the main house. The colonial corridors, adorned with family photographs and traditional crafts, seemed gloomier than usual. Upon reaching the study, she found her father sitting behind his mahogany desk with a worried expression. "Daughter, we need to talk about the future of the estate," Robert began, his tired voice revealing the weight of his concerns. "The loans are coming due and the bank—" "Dad, please," Emily interrupted. "There must be another solution. We can't close the sanctuary. What will happen to all the animals?" At that moment, Kaiser appeared in the doorway of the study, as if he could sense the tension in the air. He approached Emily and rested his head on her lap, offering silent comfort. "There is a possibility," Robert continued, adjusting his glasses. "Edward Sullivan has shown interest in investing in the property. His proposal could save us from bankruptcy." Emily felt a chill when she heard that name. Edward Sullivan, the most influential businessman in the region, was known for his real estate projects that transformed historic properties into luxury hotels. Moreover, rumors about his unethical business methods were well known in Millbrook. Edward Sullivan. "Dad, you know perfectly well that he's only interested in turning the estate into another of his boutique hotels. He would destroy everything we've built." Robert stood up and approached the window, observing the estate grounds he had inherited from his father. "Sometimes, daughter, we have to make difficult decisions to protect what we love most." The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains when Emily left the study, with Kaiser faithfully following her steps. She headed towards the area of the rescued animals, where several dogs, cats, and other animals rested in their designated spaces. This was her refuge, her purpose in life. As she checked that all the animals were comfortable for the night, she noticed something strange in Kaiser's behavior. The dog seemed restless, constantly looking towards one of the abandoned buildings at the edge of the property. "What's wrong, buddy?" Emily asked. But Kaiser only responded with a soft whimper, remaining alert and vigilant. What Emily didn't know was that this unusual behavior from Kaiser was just the beginning of a series of events that would change not only her life, but the fate of Pine Grove Estate and all its inhabitants. The faithful German shepherd held a secret that would soon come to light, revealing a truth that would connect the estate's past with its uncertain future in unexpected ways. The next morning dawned with a soft mist covering the gardens of Pine Grove Estate. Emily had slept little, worried about the conversation with her father and Kaiser's strange behavior. As she went out to perform her morning routines with the animals, she noticed that the German shepherd was not in his usual place by the main door. "Kaiser," Emily called as she walked along the stone paths. Her concern increased when, upon reaching the rescued animals area, she didn't find him there either. It was then that she heard barking coming from the abandoned old storehouse. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. The building, an adobe and stone structure dating back to colonial times, had remained closed for years. Emily vaguely remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell her about that place, whispers about ancient documents and family secrets kept within its walls. As she approached, she found Kaiser sitting in front of the deteriorated wooden door, in a protective posture that reminded her of his behavior the night before. When she tried to get closer, the dog emitted a soft growl, something completely unusual for him. Good morning, Emily, a familiar voice interrupted the scene. It was Martha, the housekeeper who had worked for the Parker family for over 30 years. The woman approached with a concerned expression on her wrinkled face. I saw Kaiser here very early. It's strange, isn't it? This storehouse has been closed for so long. Too strange, Martha, Emily replied, observing how Kaiser alternated his gaze between them and the storehouse door. Martha discreetly crossed herself before speaking. You know, your grandmother used to say that this storehouse kept more than just wine and tools. She said that here were the documents that proved... The sound of a car interrupted the conversation. A black Mercedes-Benz crossed the main entrance of the estate, raising a small cloud of dust in its wake. It's Mr. Sullivan, Martha muttered, nervously adjusting her apron. Edward Sullivan emerged from the vehicle with the confidence of someone accustomed to always getting what he wants. Tall, about 45 years old, he wore an impeccable suit that contrasted with the rustic atmosphere of the estate. Behind him, a young woman Emily immediately recognized got out. Sophia Sullivan, his daughter, with whom she had shared school years before the family moved to New York City. "Emily!" exclaimed Sophia, approaching with a genuine smile. "It's been so long!" The reunion was interrupted by a loud and clear bark. Kaiser had approached the group, maintaining a tense posture as he observed Edward Sullivan. Well, a very dedicated guardian," Edward commented with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily, you look more like your mother every day. Is Robert home? We have a scheduled meeting." Before Emily could respond, Robert appeared at the main entrance. "Edward, Sophia, welcome. Please come to my study." As the group walked away, Emily noticed how Edward Sullivan cast a calculating look towards the old storehouse. Kaiser, for his part, immediately returned to his position in front of the door of the abandoned building. "Martha," Emily whispered, "what were you going to say about the documents?" The old woman looked nervously towards the main house before answering. "Your grandmother mentioned once that in that storehouse there were papers that proved that the estate was larger, that it included lands that now belong to the Sullivan family." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. Could that be the reason for Edward Sullivan's sudden interest in the property? And what had Kaiser discovered in that old building that kept him so alert? At that moment, a faint but distinctive sound emerged from inside the storehouse. Emily and Martha exchanged surprised looks, while Kaiser maintained his protective posture, as if guarding a secret that could change the fate of all the inhabitants of Pine Grove Estate. Emily could no longer ignore the sounds coming from inside the storehouse. With determination, she headed to the shed where they kept the tools and returned with an old master key that her father used for the estate's oldest locks. Martha watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Child, are you sure about this?" Martha whispered, nervously looking towards the main house where Robert and Edward Sullivan continued their meeting. "I need to know what's going on, Martha. Kaiser never behaves like this without reason," Emily replied, as she tried to open the rusty lock. After several attempts, the door yielded with a creak that seemed to resonate throughout the estate. The interior of the storehouse was shrouded in darkness, with rays of light filtering through small cracks in the roof. The air was heavy with decades of dust and abandonment. Emily turned on her phone's flashlight, revealing old shelves full of yellowed documents and deteriorated boxes. Kaiser immediately entered, heading without hesitation towards a specific corner of the storehouse. There, to Emily's surprise, they found a mixed-breed dog with 3 newborn puppies, sheltered among old blankets and ancient papers. "So that's why you were so protective," Emily exclaimed, finally understanding Kaiser's behavior. But as she approached to examine the animals, something else caught her attention. Among the scattered papers, a yellowed envelope with the Parker family seal stood out. With trembling hands, Emily took the envelope. Inside, she found legal documents dated 1952, with her grandfather's signature and a detailed map of the estate's original property. Her eyes widened in surprise as she read the contents. "Martha, these documents, they show that the northern lands, where Sullivan's tourist development is now, were part of Pine Grove. There's an agreement here that was never finalized, a sale that wasn't legally completed." At that moment, a voice interrupted from the storehouse entrance. "I see you've found the ghosts of the past." It was Sophia Sullivan, observing them with a complex expression on her face. "I knew sooner or later this would come to light." Emily stood up, holding the documents. "Sophia, did you know about this?" "Not everything, but I overheard conversation. My father..." Sophia hesitated before continuing. He found similar documents years ago in my grandfather's archives. That's why he's so interested in buying the estate now. He wants to make sure these papers never come to light. Martha let out a small gasp. Mrs. Parker always knew. That's why she insisted that the storehouse should never be sold, that all documents should be kept. The sound of approaching footsteps made them all tense up. Kaiser positioned himself protectively in front of the dog and her puppies, while Emily quickly hid the documents in her jacket. Edward Sullivan appeared in the doorway with Robert behind him. His eyes scanned the scene with a calculating look that transformed into surprise upon seeing his daughter there. "What's going on here?" he asked in a voice that tried to maintain calm, but betrayed his uneasiness. Emily looked at her father, then at Sophia, and finally faced Edward Sullivan's gaze. At that moment, she knew that the fate of Pine Grove Estate would depend on the next words she uttered, and that the secret she had just discovered could be both their salvation and the beginning of a battle that would change the lives of all those present. "We were just helping a dog with her puppies," Emily responded with studied serenity while feeling the weight of the documents in her jacket. "Kaiser led us here." Edward Sullivan took a few steps into the storehouse, his scrutinizing gaze scanning every corner of the place. Robert, for his part, observed his daughter with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "This storehouse has been closed for years," Edward commented, brushing his fingers against one of the dusty shelves. "Isn't it strange that you're suddenly so interested in it?" Sophia stepped forward, surprising everyone. "Father, why don't you tell them the truth? Why don't you tell them about the documents you found in Grandpa's study?" Edward Sullivan's face paled for an instant before regaining his composure. "Sophia, there are things from the past that are best left where they are. Business is complicated, and the decisions of our ancestors—" "Decisions?" Emily interrupted, unable to contain herself any longer. "Is that what you call what happened? I have proof here that these lands were never legally sold." Robert approached his daughter, extending his hand. "Emily, what are you talking about? What documents?" With trembling but determined hands, Emily extracted the papers from her jacket and handed them to her father. As Robert read, his expression gradually changed from confusion to understanding, and finally to deep indignation. "Edward," Robert said gravely, "did you know about this?" "Robert, we are businessmen," Edward responded, adopting a conciliatory tone. "How you know things are not always black and white. Your father and my father came to certain agreements." "Agreements?" Martha's voice resonated with unusual strength for her age. "Mr. Anthony Parker would never have sold these lands. Mrs. Parker always said something wasn't right, that the paper—" "Enough!" exclaimed Edward, momentarily losing his composure. "Robert, I came here to offer you a solution to your financial problems, a solution that would benefit both families. Let's not complicate things by digging up the past." Kaiser, who until then had remained next to the dog and her puppies, stood up and approached Emily, positioning himself between her and Edward Sullivan. His presence, though silent, added significant weight to the tension of the moment. "Emily," Sophia intervened, "there's something else you should know. I found other documents at home, letters between our grandfathers. It wasn't just a business matter. There was a personal story behind all this." Edward tried to stop his daughter, but Sophia continued. "Grandpa Sullivan, he and Grandma Parker, they were in love in their youth. When she chose to marry Anthony Parker, Grandpa swore that someday he would obtain part of these lands as a kind of personal revenge." A heavy silence fell over the storehouse. Robert leaned against one of the shelves, processing the information. Emily looked at Sophia, recognizing in her childhood friend the same determination to uncover the truth that she felt. "This changes everything," Robert finally muttered. "Edward, I can't accept your offer, not under these circumstances." "Think it through, Robert." Edward's voice took on a threatening tone. "I have the resources and contacts to make the bank foreclose immediately. Do you really want to lose everything over some old papers?" At that moment, the sound of an engine interrupted the conversation. Through the dusty window of the storehouse, they could see another vehicle approaching the estate. It was an official state government car. "Ah, I see they've arrived," Emily said with a small smile. "Last night, after Kaiser's strange behavior, I called an old friend who works in the State Historical Archive. I told him about the storehouse and the possible historical documents it might contain. He's here to make an official assessment." Edward Sullivan's face transformed, revealing for the first time a glimpse of real concern. A middle-aged man, formally dressed and carrying a briefcase, descended from the official vehicle. Michael Thompson, director of the State Historical Archive, walked with firm steps towards the entrance of the storehouse. "Emily?" he greeted with an affable smile. "When you called me last night, I didn't imagine finding such an interesting situation." His eyes scanned the gathered group, briefly pausing on Edward Sullivan, whom he seemed to recognize. "Mr. Thompson," Edward intervened, stepping forward. "I don't think your intervention is necessary. This is a private matter between families." "On the contrary, Mr. Sullivan," Michael responded in a professional tone, "any historical document that may affect land ownership in this region is of interest to the State Archive, especially considering the historical importance of Pine Grove Estate." Sophia, who had remained silent, approached the archivist. "Mr. Thompson, there's something you should know. In my house there are also documents related to this property, personal letters and agreements that were never formalized." Edward turned abruptly towards his daughter. "Sophia, I forbid you to tell the truth, Dad." Sophia interrupted him, with tears in her eyes. "Do you know why I came back from Spain 3 months ago? It wasn't just for the family business. I found Grandpa's letters, his confessions about what he did. I can't keep being part of this." Emily approached her friend, taking her arm in support. Kaiser, sensing the tension, stayed close to both of them. Michael took out a tablet from his briefcase and began taking photographs of the documents Emily had found. "This is extraordinary," he muttered as he examined the papers. "These documents not only prove the original ownership of the lands, but also reveal a pattern of," he paused, carefully choosing his words, "irregularities in property transfers." Robert, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Edward, for years you were more than a neighbor. Our families have been intertwined for generations. Why don't we try to resolve this in a way that honors that history?" "Honor?" Edward let out a bitter laugh. "Where was the honor when your father took away the love of my father's life? When the Parkers got the best lands while the Sullivans had to settle for the leftovers?" "Grandma's love decisions don't justify land theft, Dad," Sophia intervened firmly. "Grandpa left his confessions in writing. He admitted that he forged documents, that he pressured the Parker family when they were in financial difficulties." Martha, who had been observing everything from a corner, approached with a small wooden chest. "There's something else," she said with a trembling voice. "Mrs. Parker gave this to me before she passed away, made me promise to keep it until it was necessary." She opened the chest, revealing more letters and a personal diary. She knew this day would come. She knew that the truth would have to come to light eventually. Michael took the diary with professional reverence. "This is an invaluable historical testimony, Mr. Sullivan. Given the nature of these findings, I'm obliged to initiate an official investigation. The legal implications..." "Enough!" Edward hit a shelf with his fist, raising a cloud of dust. The puppies in the corner began to cry, and the mother dog stirred nervously. Kaiser took a step forward, growling softly. Sophia approached her father, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Dad, we still have time to do the right thing. Please. I don't want our family legacy to be one." "Dad, we still have time to do the right thing. Please. I don't want our family legacy to be one of bitterness and deceit." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of more vehicles arriving at the hacienda. Through the window, they could see it was the local press. Someone had leaked the news of the historical discovery at Pine Grove Estate. The courtyard of the estate quickly filled with reporters and cameras. Flashes began to illuminate the windows of the storage room, while the excited voices of journalists created a growing murmur outside. "Who called the press?" asked Edward Serrano, his face contorted with anger and concern. "I did," replied Sophia, standing tall with determination. "Last night, after talking to Mary Ellen, I contacted a journalist friend. People have the right to know the truth, Dad, not just about the land, but about the whole story." Mary Ellen looked at her friend with a mixture of admiration and concern. The Sophia who had returned from Spain was very different from the shy young woman she remembered from her teenage years. The years abroad had transformed her into a woman determined to face injustice, even if it meant confronting her own family. "Mr. Roberts," intervened Michelangelo, the archivist, "I suggest we move this meeting to a more appropriate place. These documents need to be properly preserved. and the presence of the press could compromise their integrity. Carol approached Mary Ellen and whispered, "Miss, what do we do with the dog and her puppies? We can't leave them here with all this commotion." "I'll take care of it," replied Mary Ellen, grateful to have something practical to focus on. She approached the corner where Kaiser was standing guard next to the small canine family. With gentle and experienced movements, she began to prepare for a safe transfer of the animals. Meanwhile, Edward Serrano seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. His mask of control and power was visibly crumbling as he watched his daughter, who was already heading towards the door of the storage room. "Sophia, please!" His voice sounded almost pleading. "Don't do this. Think about the family legacy, about everything we've built." "Legacy?" Sophia stopped and turned to her father. "Do you mean the empire you built on lies and forged documents? Or are you talking about Grandpa's true legacy, his letters full of remorse and guilt?" Mr. Roberts, who had been reviewing more documents with Michelangelo, looked up. "Edward, we can still handle this in a way that benefits both families. Not everything has to end in scandal." At that moment, Mary Ellen, who had managed to organize the transfer of the dog and her puppies with Carol's help, noticed something else among the scattered papers, an old photograph, yellowed by time. In it, two young couples smiled at the camera in front of the estate, their grandparents in happier times. "Look at this," she said, showing the photograph. "Before pride and ambition ruined everything, our families were friends, sharing joys. Can't we get some of that back?" Sophia took the photograph with trembling hands. "Mary Ellen is right, Dad. It's not too late to make things right. The press is here, yes, but we can control the narrative. We can turn this story of deception into one of redemption." Edward Serrano looked at his daughter for a long time, as if seeing her for the first time. Then his eyes fell on the reporters, who were already beginning to crowd at the entrance of the storage room. Finally, he looked at Mr. Roberts, his old friend, and at Mary Ellen, who represented everything his own daughter could have been if he had chosen a different path. "Maybe," he began to say, but was interrupted by the sound of his phone. Looking at the screen, his face paled even more. "The board of directors, they've already found out." Michelangelo, who had been meticulously organizing the documents found, approached the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you prepare a joint statement. The press won't wait much longer, and it's better to control the narrative before speculation begins to circulate." Kaiser, who had remained alert throughout the situation, suddenly perked up his ears and looked towards the entrance. The camera flashes intensified, and a familiar voice resonated from outside. "Mary Ellen, are you there? It's Diego Hernandez from Channel 8. We've been informed about a historical discovery at the estate." The moment was interrupted by the sound of heels on the stone floor. Isabella Roberts, Mary Ellen's mother, appeared at the entrance of the storage room with a presence that commanded immediate attention. Her face, normally serene, showed iron determination. "I'll handle the press," she announced with authority. "After all, I know this story better than anyone." Everyone looked at her in surprise. Isabella rarely got involved in estate matters, preferring to stay in the background. However, now she was advancing with the confidence of someone who had been holding an ace up her sleeve for too long. "Isabella?" Edward Serrano took a step back, as if he had seen a ghost. "I didn't think you—" "That I what, Edward?" "That I would know the truth, that I would keep the letters your wife sent me before she left." Isabella pulled an envelope from her purse. "Marianne told me everything before she went to Europe, about how she discovered the false documents, about the threats she received when she tried to do the right thing." Sophia brought her hands to her mouth. "My mother? Is that why she left? You always told us she had chosen to stay in Madrid after the divorce." "Your mother was a brave woman, Sophia," Isabella continued. "She left to protect you, but also to gather evidence. The European companies your father did business with, the original documents she found in Madrid." Edward collapsed into an old chair, the weight of the revelations finally breaking his facade. "Marianne, she always knew. And now I know everything too." A new voice joined the conversation. At the entrance of the storage room, elegantly dressed and with a folder in hand, stood Marianne Serrano. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia ran to her mother, melting into an embrace that contained years of absence and unanswered questions. Edward Serrano looked as if he had seen a ghost, his face paler than ever. "Marianne," he murmured, "What are you doing here?" "I came for our daughter, Edward." "And for the truth." Marianne advanced gracefully, greeting Isabella with a knowing embrace. "When Sophia found me in Madrid and told me about the documents she had discovered, I knew it was time to return." Mary Ellen watched the scene in amazement, while Kaiser remained alert at her side. The journalists outside continued calling, their voices creating a constant background murmur. "The documents I found in Madrid," Marianne continued, opening her folder, "not only prove the falsification of the deeds, they also reveal a network of suspicious transactions involving several members of the board of directors of your companies, Edward." Mr. Roberts, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "So it's not just about our estate, is it?" "No," Marianne confirmed. "It's much bigger than that, and now we have a decision to make. We can let all this explode in the press, destroying both families in the process, or we can do the right thing," Sophia completed, looking at her father. "Dad, we still have time to fix this, to make things right." Michelangelo, the archivist who had been documenting everything, intervened. "From a legal perspective, a voluntary restitution and an agreement between the parties would be the most beneficial solution for everyone." Edward Serrano looked at his ex-wife, his daughter, and then at the Roberts family. Kaiser, as if sensing the crucial moment, sat between both families, his presence a silent reminder of how all this had begun. "And what exactly do you suggest?" Edward finally asked, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. Marianne stepped forward, placing her folder on a dusty table. "I have a proposal, one that could save both legacies and perhaps repair some of what has been broken." Marianne spread several documents on the table, her precise and controlled movements revealing years of experience in the corporate world. "During my time in Madrid, I not only gathered evidence, I also developed contacts in the sustainable tourism and historical conservation sector." Mary Ellen and Sophia approached the table, followed by their respective parents. Kaiser remained vigilant by the door, where Carol was supervising the transfer of the dog and her puppies to a quieter place. "My proposal is simple," Marianne continued. "Turn Pine Grove Estate not into a common boutique hotel, but into the region's first historical conservation center and animal sanctuary, a joint project between both families." Isabella smiled, recognizing the brilliance of the idea. "A project that would honor both the history of the estate and Mary Ellen's work with animals." "Exactly," Marianne nodded. "The European investors I've been in contact with are especially interested in projects that combine historical preservation with social and environmental responsibility. They would be willing to finance the complete restoration of the estate and the expansion of the sanctuary." Edward, who had been listening in silence, looked up. "And what would happen to my current developments?" "They could be integrated into the project," Marianne replied. "Your boutique hotels could be part of a sustainable tourism network. Visitors looking for luxury are also increasingly interested in authentic experiences and noble causes." Mr. Roberts approached the documents, adjusting his glasses. "And the legal issue?" "The disputed lands. A trust would be established," Marianne explained. "Both families would be joint owners, with an administrative board that would include members from both sides. The profits would be distributed equitably, and a significant part would be allocated to conservation and animal care." Mary Ellen felt her heart racing. "Could we expand the sanctuary? Have adequate facilities for more animals?" "Not only that," Sophia intervened, understanding her mother's vision. "We could create educational programs, invite schools, establish agreements with universities for veterinary research." Michelangelo, who had been taking notes, nodded in approval. "And the State Historical Archive could collaborate in the preservation and exhibition of the estate's historical documents. It would be a truly comprehensive project." Edward Serrano stood up and walked to the window, observing the journalists who were still waiting outside. "And what will we tell them? The board of directors?" "The truth," Marianne replied firmly. "That the Roberts and Serrano families have decided to honor their shared history through a revolutionary project. That instead of destroying the past, we have chosen to build upon it." "It could work," Edward murmured, and for the first time all day, a small smile appeared on his face. "In fact, it could be more profitable than my original plan." Sophia approached her father and took his hand. "And more importantly, it would be the right thing, an opportunity for redemption, to create something meaningful." "There's something else," Isabella added, pulling an old photograph from her purse. I found this among Grandma's things. It's from the original inauguration of the estate when both families celebrated together. Perhaps it's time to recapture that spirit. At that moment, a ray of sunlight pierced through the dusty windows of the storage room, illuminating the old photograph and the hopeful faces of all present. Kaiser, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere, approached Mary Ellen and rested his head on her hand. "So," said Mary Ellen, looking at everyone present, "how do we begin?" The press conference was organized in the main courtyard of the estate, where the century-old bougainvilleas provided a perfect backdrop for the cameras. Mr. Roberts and Edward Serrano, for the first time in years, presented themselves together before the media, flanked by their families. "Today we are not just announcing a business project," Mr. Roberts began, his voice clear and firm. "We are announcing the reconciliation of two families and the birth of a vision that will honor the past while building the future." Mary Ellen observed from the side, with Kaiser faithfully sitting beside her. Through the windows of the makeshift clinic, she could see the rescued dog and her puppies, now comfortably settled in a suitable space. Somehow those small animals had been the catalyst for all this change. "The Pine Grove Historical Conservation Center and Animal Sanctuary," announced Edward Serrano, "will be a pioneering project that will combine the preservation of our cultural heritage with the protection of wildlife and animals in need." Sophia, who had been working all night with Mary Ellen on the project details, stepped forward to explain the technical aspects. Her presentation, backed by preliminary architectural projections, showed how the historic buildings would be restored and adapted for their new purposes. "The old stables will be converted into a state-of-the-art veterinary hospital," Sophia explained, pointing to the plans. "The historic gardens will house spaces adapted for different species, and the storage room where it all began will be transformed into a museum that will tell the story of the estate and its inhabitants, both human and animal." The journalists took notes frantically, while the cameras captured every moment. The story of two feuding families finding reconciliation through an innovative project was exactly the kind of news the public loved. Marianne, who had remained in the background, smiled discreetly. Her plan was working better than expected. The European investors had already confirmed their interest, and the first transfers to start the project were in process. "What about the historical documents found?" asked one of the journalists. Michelangelo, the archivist, took the microphone. "All documents will be properly catalogued and preserved in the estate's museum, with digital copies in the State Historical Archive. They are an invaluable testimony to the history of our region." As the press conference continued, Carol discreetly approached Mary Ellen. "Miss, you have to see this," she whispered, guiding her to the temporary clinic. There, the scene they found made them smile. Kaiser had silently entered and was lying next to the rescued dog and her puppies, like a protective guardian. One of the puppies, the smallest, had curled up against his paw. "It seems some have already begun their own reconciliation," Sophia commented, who had followed them. "It's perfect," Mary Ellen replied, taking out her phone to photograph the scene. "This image will be perfect for the sanctuary's first social media post." Isabella appeared at the door of the clinic. "Mary Ellen, Sophia, the architects have arrived. They want to start evaluating the spaces for the first phase of renovation." The two young women exchanged knowing looks. What had begun as a generational conflict had transformed into an opportunity for the new generation to lead the change. "Are you ready?" Sophia asked her friend. Mary Ellen looked one last time at Kaiser and his protégés, then at the journalists in the courtyard, and finally at the preliminary plans on her desk. "More than ever," she replied with a smile. The first week after the announcement passed like a whirlwind of activity. Architects came and went through the estate, taking measurements and making notes. The veterinarians consulted by Mary Ellen presented proposals for the design of the animal hospital, while historical conservation specialists evaluated every corner of the old buildings. However, the morning of the following Monday brought the first real challenge. Mary Ellen arrived early at the clinic as usual, only to find a small crowd gathered at the main entrance of the estate. "Mary Ellen," called an older woman holding a box with an injured cat, "we heard about the new sanctuary on the news. Can you help us?" Behind her, at least a dozen people were waiting with different animals in need of attention. Mary Ellen's heart sank. The veterinary hospital was not yet built, and her small clinic was not equipped for so many cases. "Mary Ellen!" Sophia's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Her friend was arriving in her car, and seeing the situation, she immediately understood the dilemma. "Wait, I have an idea." Sophia took out her phone and made some quick calls. In less than an hour, 3 veterinarians from nearby clinics arrived to help, and Edward Serrano had authorized the use of one of his empty corporate buildings as a temporary care center. "It's perfect," Mary Ellen commented as they organized the space. "We can use this as a pilot project, learn what we need for the definitive hospital." Meanwhile, at the estate, Mr. Roberts and Edward were overseeing the first restoration works when a group of village elders approached them. "Mr. Roberts, Mr. Serrano," the oldest of the group spoke, "we have lived here all our lives, and we know stories about the estate that are not in any document." Marianne, who was passing by with a group of European investors, stopped, interested. The investors, captivated by the elders, began taking notes enthusiastically. "This is exactly what we're looking for," exclaimed one of them. "Living history, real testimonies. Could we include an oral history project in the museum?" Isabella, who had been organizing the historical documents with Michelangelo, joined the conversation. "That we could create an audiovisual archive, record the stories of the oldest inhabitants, and link each story to the physical spaces of the estate," added Sophia, who was returning from the temporary veterinary center. "We could use QR codes at different points so visitors can listen to the stories related to each place." Kaiser, who had been following Mary Ellen all day, suddenly perked up his ears and ran towards the entrance. A school bus was stopping in front of the estate. "The elementary school," exclaimed Carol. "I forgot to mention that the principal called yesterday. They want to organize educational visits." Mary Ellen and Sophia exchanged looks of surprise and excitement. The project was coming to life faster than they had imagined, and in ways they hadn't foreseen. "We need to speed up some things," said Edward, observing the growing activity. "Mary Ellen, what do you need most urgently for the temporary veterinary center?" "An X-ray machine, more recovery cages, and at least 2 more veterinarians," she replied without hesitation. "Consider it done," Edward nodded. "Sophia, contact the marketing team. We need a more solid communication strategy to handle all this." Marianne smiled, watching her ex-husband and daughter work together for the first time in years. "And I'll make sure the permits and licenses are expedited," she added. "My contacts in Madrid can help with the international certification of the project." Mr. Roberts, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "You know, when I was a child, my father used to say that the estate had a life of its own, that it chose its own destiny. I think I finally understand what he meant." A bark from Kaiser seemed to confirm his words, as the afternoon sun bathed the estate in a golden glow, illuminating the bustle of people working together towards a common goal, uniting the past with the future in a present full of possibilities. The restoration of the estate was progressing well when an unexpected discovery shook the foundations of the project. During the renovation works of the West Wing, workers found a hidden room behind a false wall. The space, perfectly preserved, contained old trunks full of documents, photographs, and personal objects. "Mary Ellen, Sophia," Carol called urgently. "You have to see this." The 2 young women ran towards the newly discovered room, followed by Kaiser, who sniffed the air curiously. The space looked like a time capsule, with decades of dust covering every surface. "They're letters," Sophia whispered, carefully taking one of the yellowed envelopes. "And diaries, as many diaries." Mary Ellen approached a particularly large trunk, where she found something that took her breath away. A manuscript titled, "The True Purpose of Pine Grove." "It's my great-grandmother's handwriting," she said, recognizing the elegant calligraphy. "Carol, did you ever hear about this?" The old housekeeper shook her head, but her eyes sparkled with recognition. "Only rumors. Mrs. Eugenia, your great-grandmother, always said that the estate held a secret bigger than all our family disputes." Marianne and Edward, who had been alerted to the discovery, entered the room, followed by Mr. Roberts and Isabella. The space felt increasingly small with so many people, but no one wanted to miss this moment. "Dear descendants," Mary Ellen began to read from the manuscript, "if you are reading this, it means you have finally found the true treasure of Pine Grove. This estate was never meant to be owned by a single family. It was conceived as a refuge, a sanctuary not only for animals, but for all souls in need of protection." Sophia, who had begun to review other documents, let out an exclamation. "Look at this. These are records of people who took refuge here during the revolution. The estate served as a safe point in a network of houses that protected persecuted families. And not just during the Revolution, added Marianne, who had found more recent documents. There are records up to the 1960s. The estate continued to be a refuge long after. Edward approached a pile of photographs. In them, people from different eras and backgrounds could be seen, all finding refuge at Pine Grove. And in many of the images, guard dogs appeared, Kaiser's ancestors, watching and protecting. The true legacy of Pine Grove, Mary Ellen continued reading, is not in its lands or its walls, but in its spirit of protection and healing. The disputes over ownership are insignificant compared to its true purpose. Mr. Roberts collapsed into an old chair, visibly moved. My father, he tried to tell me so many times. He always insisted there was something more important than the property titles. The animals knew, Mary Ellen murmured, petting Kaiser. That's why they've always found refuge here. Somehow they've kept the true spirit of the estate alive. Isabella, who had remained silent, finally spoke. This changes everything. And at the same time, it changes nothing. Isn't this exactly what we were trying to do with the new project? Turn the estate into a sanctuary? Yes, but now it's bigger, Sophia replied, her eyes shining with excitement. We're not just creating something new, we're reclaiming the true purpose of Pine Grove. However, as the group processed this discovery, Kaiser began to bark insistently, looking towards a specific corner of the room. Mary Ellen approached and, upon moving some objects, found a sealed metal box with an old padlock. There's something else, she said, holding the box. Something our great-grandmother wanted us to find. The metal box weighed more than its size suggested. Mary Ellen held it carefully while Edward examined the old padlock. I can call a locksmith, he suggested, but Carol raised a hand, stopping the suggestion. That won't be necessary, said the old housekeeper, removing a chain from her neck. A small antique key hung from it. Mrs. Eugenia gave me this many years ago, telling me that the time would come when it would be needed. Carol's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the key into the padlock. With a soft click, the mechanism opened, revealing its contents after decades of waiting. Inside the box was an old accounting book, several legal documents, and, surprisingly, a velvet bag that jingled with the characteristic sound of coins. It's the estate's secret ledger, Carol explained, as Mary Ellen carefully opened it. Mrs. Eugenia kept a record of all the funds destined to help refugees. The yellowed pages revealed a complex network of donations, investments, and expenses, all carefully documented. But the most surprising thing was the names of the contributing families, Roberts, Serrano, and many other prominent families in the region. Our families, Sophia murmured, were working together from the beginning. Marianne took one of the legal documents and her eyes widened in surprise. This is a trust, established in 1918. According to this, a significant part of the estate's profits was to be perpetually allocated to charitable works and protection. The coins, said Mary Ellen, opening the velvet bag. They weren't common coins, but ancient gold and silver pieces, each engraved with specific symbols. What do they mean? They were signals, Carol replied. When someone arrived seeking refuge, they presented one of these coins. It was a way to identify those who truly needed help. Edward examined one of the coins carefully. My father, he had one just like this. I always thought it was just a family keepsake. Because it was, Isabella confirmed. Each family involved in the protection network kept one. It was their commitment to the cause. Mr. Roberts approached the window of the secret room, observing the estate grounds with new eyes. All this time we thought we were fighting over land and power, when in reality we were guardians of something much more important. Kaiser, who had remained alert throughout the discovery, suddenly moved his ears and ran towards the door. In the courtyard, the sound of vehicles announced the arrival of more visitors. It's the architects with the new plans, Sophia remembered. But now we have to rethink the entire project, Mary Ellen completed. We're not just building an animal sanctuary and a historical conservation center. We're reviving the true purpose of Pine Grove. Marianne nodded, her mind already working on the legal and logistical implications. We can adapt the original trust, update it for modern times, but maintain its essence. And the coins, Edward added, holding one of the pieces up to the light, could be the symbol of our new commitment, not as secret signals, but as a reminder of our duty. Mary Ellen looked at Kaiser, who had returned to her side. The animals always knew, didn't they? That's why they've always found their way here. The estate never stopped being a sanctuary. Sophia took the ledger and began to leaf through it in more detail. There are names here, hundreds of names of people who found refuge. We could find their descendants, document their stories, and create a new chapter in the history of Pine Grove, Isabella completed. One that honors the past while building the future. The sound of the architects calling from the courtyard brought the group back to the present. They had an important meeting ahead, but now they had something more valuable than plans and budgets. They had a purpose, a mission that had survived generations waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The meeting with the architects transformed into something very different from what was planned. Instead of reviewing existing plans, the group found themselves sharing the newly discovered history and completely reimagining the project. "We can't simply build modern facilities over this history," Mary Ellen explained, spreading the old documents on the conference table. "We need to integrate the past with the present." The architects, initially perplexed, soon caught the enthusiasm. A young architect, Laura Mendoza, began sketching new ideas on her tablet. "We could create spaces that tell the story," she suggested, projecting her sketches on the wall. Each area of the animal sanctuary could be connected to a part of the estate's history as a refuge. Sophia, who had been reviewing more documents from the secret room, looked up. "I've found old plans that show tunnels and secret passages. Some could be restored as part of the historical museum, and others could be adapted to create safe routes for animal transport," added Mary Ellen, thinking about the practical needs of the sanctuary. As the group discussed the new plans, Kaiser suddenly stood up and ran towards the estate entrance. Mary Ellen followed him, finding an elderly woman observing the buildings with tears in her eyes. "Excuse me," said the woman in a trembling voice. "I saw on the news that you had found old documents. My mother used to tell me stories about how this estate saved our family during difficult times." Edward and Marianne exchanged significant looks before approaching the visitor. "Please come in," Marianne invited. "We'd like to hear your story." Over the next few hours, more people began to arrive. Some brought their own photographs and documents, others simply stories passed down through generations. Carol, with her prodigious memory, recognized names and connected stories. "It's as if the estate were calling everyone back," Isabella murmured, watching as the courtyard filled with visitors. Mr. Roberts, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "We can't disappoint these people. The new project must honor all these stories. And create new ones," added Sophia, who had just received an important call. "The European investors are even more interested now. They say this combination of history, conservation, and social purpose is exactly what they're looking for." Mary Ellen observed everything from the entrance of the temporary clinic, where several rescued animals were resting. Kaiser remained by her side, his presence a comforting constant amid so many changes. "You know what's most extraordinary?" said Marianne, approaching her. "Every person who arrives brings not only a story, but also a desire to contribute. Some offer documents, others their skills or resources. As if the original spirit of the estate had never disappeared," Mary Ellen replied. "It was just waiting for the right moment to be reborn." Edward, who had been listening to the visitors' stories, joined the conversation. "So I've been thinking, the old coins we found, what if we create a foundation? We could use the coin design as a symbol." "The Pine Grove Foundation," Sophia nodded. "An organization that ensures the estate's original purpose continues, no matter what changes the future brings." As they discussed the details, one of the puppies that Kaiser had helped protect approached wobbling, followed by its mother. The small animal stopped in front of the group, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "It's perfect," Mary Ellen smiled. "The animals have always known this place is special. Now it's up to us to make sure it stays that way." The afternoon before the grand opening of the renovated Pine Grove Sanctuary, the bustle at the estate reached its peak. The final details were being fine-tuned as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, bathing the restored buildings in a golden light that seemed fitting for the occasion. Mary Ellen walked through the new spaces of the animal sanctuary, verifying that everything was perfect. The modern veterinary facilities blended harmoniously with the historic architecture, creating an environment that combined functionality with classic beauty. Kaiser faithfully followed her, as always, though now he shared his guardian duties with a new generation of rescued dogs. "Everything is ready in the recovery area," reported one of the veterinarians from the expanded team. "The animals have adapted perfectly to the new spaces." In the newly finished museum, Sophia and Michelangelo supervised the installation of the last display cases. The ancient coins occupied a central place, along with photographs and documents that told the estate's secret history. Each piece had been carefully selected to narrate not only the past, but also the present and future of the place. "Can you believe all this happened in just 6 months?" Sophia commented, adjusting the lighting on a display case containing her great-grandmother's diary. "When people come together for a noble cause, miracles happen," replied Carol, who was entering with a tray of coffee for the workers. The former housekeeper was now the official guardian of the museum's oral histories, her memory and wisdom as valuable as the documents on display. In the main courtyard, Edward and Mr. Roberts supervised the final preparations for the opening ceremony. The old dispute seemed to belong to another life, replaced by a common purpose that had strengthened not only the families, but the entire community. "The descendants of the families who found refuge here will start arriving early tomorrow," Marianne informed, checking her tablet. "Some are coming from very far away. The estate's story has touched more lives than we imagined." Isabella joined the group, carrying an object wrapped in old cloth. "I found something else in the family archives," she said, unwrapping an old guest book. "Every person who found refuge here signed this book. I thought we could continue the tradition, but now to register everyone who contributes to Pine Grove's new purpose." Mary Ellen took the book reverently, its yellowed pages containing hundreds of signatures, each representing a life touched by the estate's generosity. "It's perfect," she murmured. The past and present united in these pages. As the group admired the book, a familiar sound caught their attention. Kaiser was barking cheerfully while playing with the puppies he had helped protect, now grown and healthy. The mother dog watched calmly from a sunny corner of the courtyard. "You know," said Sophia, "when all this began, we thought we were saving the estate. But in reality, the estate was saving us. It helped us remember who we really were," added Edward, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder, "and who we could be." The sun had almost set when the group finally gathered for a final review of the preparations. The newly installed lights began to turn on automatically, illuminating the paths and buildings with a warm and welcoming glow. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" asked Mr. Roberts, looking at each of those present. The answer came in the form of smiles and confident nods. Tomorrow, Pine Grove would not only open its doors as an animal sanctuary and historical museum, it would be reborn as a symbol of hope and renewal, a testimony to the power of unity and shared purpose. Mary Ellen watched from the window of her newly renovated office as Kaiser, sitting beside her, wagged his tail enthusiastically at each new arrival. The old German shepherd, now accompanied by a team of rescued dogs trained as helpers, seemed to understand the importance of the moment. "It's time," announced Sophia, entering the office. "Everyone's waiting." In the main courtyard, hundreds of people had gathered, families whose ancestors had found refuge on the estate, international investors, local authorities, and most importantly, neighbors from the community who had contributed in countless ways to the project. Mr. Roberts and Edward Serrano ascended together to the podium installed in front of the main entrance. Beside them, a large canvas covered something that would be revealed during the ceremony. "A year ago," Mr. Roberts began, "we thought we were about to lose this place. Today we realized that we were actually about to rediscover it." Edward took the floor. "Pine Grove Estate has always been more than buildings and land. It has been a symbol of hope, a refuge for those in need, be they human or animal." Marianne and Isabella stepped forward, holding the ancient guest book and the historical coins. "Today," Marianne announced, "we not only inaugurate a sanctuary and a museum, we renew a promise that began generations ago." At a signal, the canvas was removed, revealing a new monument, a bronze sculpture showing a guard dog protecting a family and several animals. On the base, the words "Refuge, Healing, Hope" were engraved along with the design of the ancient coins. Mary Ellen, with Kaiser by her side, approached the podium. "This place," she said, her voice clear and emotional, "taught us that true greatness lies not in possessing, but in protecting, not in dividing, but in uniting." Sophia continued, The Pine Grove Foundation commits to keeping this legacy alive. Every rescued animal, every preserved story, every life touched by this place is part of a story greater than ourselves. Carol, the faithful guardian of the estate's stories, was the first to sign the new registry book, her trembling but determined signature marking the beginning of a new chapter. As the ceremony continued, something extraordinary began to happen. People from different generations came forward to share their stories. An elderly man recounted how his parents had found refuge during difficult times. A young girl spoke about the dog she had rescued that now lived happily in the sanctuary. By sunset, when most visitors had left, Mary Ellen and Sophia walked along the illuminated paths of the estate. Kaiser followed them, along with the mother dog and her now grown puppies, who were now part of the sanctuary's therapy dog team. "You know what's most beautiful?" said Sophia, stopping in front of the new monument. "That this isn't an ending. It's just the beginning." Mary Ellen nodded, watching how the evening lights played on the bronze of the sculpture. The estate always knew its purpose. It just needed us to remember it. At that moment, the sound of a bell resonated softly through the grounds of Pine Grove. It was the estate's old bell, restored and reinstalled, which would now mark not only the hours, but significant moments in the life of the sanctuary. And as the sun set on Pine Grove Estate, its golden rays illuminated not only the restored buildings and renewed gardens, but also the faces of all those who had found their purpose in this special place, where past and present met in perfect harmony, and where the future promised to continue a story of love, protection, and hope that had begun generations ago. In the weeks that followed the grand opening, Pine Grove Estate buzzed with activity. The animal sanctuary quickly filled with rescued creatures of all kinds, from abandoned pets to injured wildlife. Mary Ellen found herself working long hours, but the joy of seeing animals heal and thrive made every moment worthwhile. One particularly memorable day began when a local farmer arrived with an injured horse. The animal, a majestic bay stallion, had been caught in barbed wire and needed immediate attention. As Mary Ellen and her team worked to treat the horse's wounds, she couldn't help but feel a connection to the stories of the past. "You know," she said to Sophia, who was assisting her, "I bet this is exactly the kind of thing our great-grandmothers would have done." Sophia nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. "It's like we're living their legacy, isn't it?" Meanwhile, in the museum wing, Michelangelo was leading a group of excited schoolchildren on a tour. The kids marveled at the old photographs and documents, their eyes wide as they listened to tales of secret passages and hidden refugees. "And this," Michael said, pointing to a display case containing the ancient coins, "is how people knew they were safe here. These coins were like secret passwords." A small boy raised his hand. "Mister, does that mean Pine Grove was like a superhero hideout?" Michael chuckled. "In a way, yes. It was a place where ordinary people did extraordinary things to help others." Outside, in the newly landscaped gardens, Edward Serrano was meeting with a group of eco-tourism experts. The estate's successful transformation had caught the attention of sustainable development advocates worldwide, and there was talk of using Pine Grove as a model for similar projects. "The key," Edward explained, gesturing to the harmonious blend of restored buildings and natural landscapes, "is finding the balance between preservation and progress. We're not just protecting the past, we're building a sustainable future." As the day wore on, Mary Ellen found herself in the old library, now converted into a cozy reading room for visitors. She was leafing through one of the newly discovered diaries when Kaiser, ever faithful, nudged her hand. Looking up, she saw an elderly woman standing in the doorway, tears glistening in her eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I think I found my grandmother's name in one of the old registers." Mary Ellen stood, welcoming the woman with a warm smile. "You're not intruding at all. Please, come in. I'd love to hear your story." As the woman began to recount tales passed down through her family of a harrowing escape and the sanctuary they found at Pine Grove, Mary Ellen felt a profound sense of connection to all those who had come before. She realized that the estate was more than just a place. It was a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of compassion and courage. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, the core team gathered in the courtyard. Mr. Roberts, Edward, Marianne, Isabella, Sophia, and Mary Ellen stood in a circle, joined by Carol and Michelangelo. "I never imagined it would be like this," Mr. Roberts said, his voice filled with emotion. "When we started this journey, I thought we were just saving a piece of property. But we've done so much more." Edward nodded, placing a hand on his former rival's shoulder. "We've honored our ancestors, protected our heritage, and created something that will continue to do good for generations to come." Marianne smiled, her eyes sweeping over the estate. "And we're not done yet. Every day brings new opportunities, new stories to add to Pine Grove's legacy." As if to emphasize her point, the sound of barking drew their attention. Kaiser was leading a group of the sanctuary's dogs, including the mother dog and her now-grown puppies, in a playful romp through the courtyard. Sophia laughed, the joy in her voice evident. "Look at them. It's like they know they're part of something special too." Mary Ellen knelt down to greet Kaiser, who bounded over to her, tail wagging. As she scratched behind his ears, she felt a surge of gratitude for the loyal companion who had, in many ways, been the catalyst for all of this. "You know," she said, looking up at the group, "I think the most beautiful part of all this is how it keeps growing. Every person who visits, every animal we help, every story we uncover, it all becomes part of Pine Grove's story." Isabella nodded, her eyes misty with emotion. "And in doing so, it becomes part of our story too. We're all connected now, in ways we never imagined." As the group stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, they felt a profound sense of accomplishment and purpose. Pine Grove Estate had been transformed, not just physically but in spirit. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of reconciliation, and a living example of how honoring the past could create a brighter future. The old bell in the tower began to chime, its clear tones ringing out across the estate. It was a sound that spoke of history and heritage, but also of new beginnings and endless possibilities. Mary Ellen looked around at the faces of her family, friends, and colleagues, all united in this shared vision. She thought of the countless lives that had been and would be touched by Pine Grove, human and animal alike. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. As the last notes of the bell faded away, a sense of peace settled over the estate. The day was ending, but the legacy of Pine Grove was just beginning to unfold. And with it, the promise of a future filled with compassion, healing, and hope for all who would find their way to this special place.